The girl no one wanted, the slave market on planet Caros smelled of sweat, oil, and despair. It was a place where the unwanted were sold, broken robots, failed clones, and living beings treated like junk. That morning, the air was dry and the crowd thick. Traders shouted, chains rattled, credits exchanged hands. In the middle of it all stood a young alien woman, thin like a shadow and silent like a ghost. Her skin was pale blue, bruised in places. Her long dark hair was messy, tangled with dust. She wore nothing but torn rags. Her wrists were marked with metal burns, fresh and old. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Her golden eyes just stared at the ground. "Next!" shouted the seller. He pulled her forward roughly by a collar around her neck. "One more slave from the mines. She's useless now. Too weak to lift rocks. 1 credit. Anyone?" The crowd laughed. Some turned away. Others jeered. "A credit? That's what I spend on a stale sandwich. She's not worth a single breath." But one man didn't laugh. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, tall, strong, with tired eyes. A human. He wore a dusty coat and carried an old backpack. His name was Darren Cross, a traveler and former Earth engineer. He stepped forward slowly. The seller blinked. "You want her?" Darren looked at the girl. She didn't meet his eyes. She just stood still, like she'd already given up. "Yes," Darren said. "I'll take her." People laughed again. "Crazy human," someone whispered, "wasting credits on trash." But Darren didn't care. He tossed a silver coin to the seller. The seller caught it, grinned wide, and shoved the girl forward. She stumbled but didn't resist. Darren caught her gently. She flinched at his touch. "You're free now," Darren said softly. But the girl didn't answer. They walked through the narrow streets of the mining town. The girl limped beside him, her steps weak, her head down. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't speak at all. Darren led her to a small room above a mechanic shop. It was quiet, warm, and had clean water. Not much, but safer than the mines. He helped her sit on a bed and gave her food. She didn't touch it. "I don't want anything," she whispered. Her voice was dry, rough, like she hadn't spoken in weeks. "You need to eat," Darren said. "You're safe here. No more chains." The girl looked up at him finally. Her eyes were sharp, like fire hiding behind fog. "Everyone says that," she said coldly. "Then the pain comes again." Darren didn't argue. He placed the food on a tray beside her and sat across the room. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I don't want to own you. I just couldn't leave you there." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why?" He shrugged. "You looked like you wanted to disappear. I felt that way too." Silence. Then, she slowly reached for the food. That night, Darren fixed an old machine in the corner while the girl rested on the bed. Her body trembled every few minutes like memories crawling under her skin. At one point, she jolted up with a scream. Darren rushed to her side. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe." But she backed away, covering her head with her hands. "Please don't lock me in the dark again," she cried. He didn't touch her, just sat nearby and whispered, "No cages here. Not ever again." She looked at him, tears in her golden eyes. Something broke inside her, but something else started to mend. By morning, she was sitting by the window watching the orange sun rise over the scrapyard. Darren handed her a clean blanket. She took it slowly, unsure. "What's your name?" he asked, gently. She stayed quiet, for a moment, then whispered, "Sarah." He smiled. "Sarah. That's a strong name." She didn't smile back, but her voice was clearer now when she asked, "Why did you really take me?" Darren thought for a second. "I don't believe. People are garbage. I've seen war, slavery, death, but I still believe one kind act can change a life." Sarah looked at him. For the first time, she didn't look afraid. Sarah didn't know what to do with freedom. She sat on the edge of the bed with the blanket around her shoulders like armor. The room was small but clean. No chains, no guards, no barking voices. Still, she didn't feel safe, not really. She watched Darren move around quietly, fixing wires, cleaning tools, making warm tea. He didn't stare at her, didn't ask her to serve or kneel. That confused her more than pain ever did. She had spent 2 years in the mines of Karos. Down there, you obeyed or you bled, you begged for food, you were punished for speaking. Trust was a weapon, and she had learned to never hold one. When Darren placed a steaming cup in front of her, she stared at it suspiciously. "It's not poison," he said with a soft smile. "Just tea. Good for the throat." Zara didn't touch it. Instead, she whispered, "If I don't drink, will you beat me?" Darren stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her and answered, "No. You can drink it when you're ready. Or not at all. That choice is yours now." Zara didn't understand. That night her dreams came back. The walls were closing in. The guards were laughing. A whip cracked. Her back burned. Someone was dragging her into a tunnel where no light lived. Zara screamed and kicked. She woke up, soaked in sweat, breathing like she had run miles. The room was dark, but calm. Only one person stood near her. Darren, holding a soft cloth, his eyes filled with concern. "Bad dream?" he asked quietly. She tried to back away, but he raised his hand slowly. "I won't touch you, I promise." Zara looked around. The room was not the mines. There were no chains. No other slaves. "You left the door open," she said. "I always will," Darren replied. "You can leave any time." The next day, Zara stood by the doorway for an hour. She looked down the stairs. Outside, the street was busy with aliens and traders. She could run, escape, disappear. But her legs didn't move. She returned to the table, sat silently and drank the tea he made. Something inside her had changed. She wasn't sure what it was, but it felt strange. A warmth she hadn't known. Since she was a child, Darren never asked questions, never forced her to talk. But he told her stories about Earth, about oceans and forests and food that didn't come from a bag. He told her about his dog back home, and how even animals on Earth had more kindness than some rulers in the galaxy. Zara listened. She never spoke, but her eyes began to blink less like a trapped animal, and more like a person waking up. One evening, while Darren was fixing a broken heater, he pricked his finger on a sharp wire. "Damn," he muttered, sucking the blood. Zara, startled, dropped her blanket and rushed over. "You're bleeding," she said. "You need to clean it." He smiled. "You care?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a clean cloth, dipped it in water, and gently wrapped it around his finger. Her hands trembled. She hadn't touched anyone in months. When she realized what she was doing, she pulled away quickly. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back. But Darren just looked at her with calm eyes and said, "Don't be. You were kind. That's never something to be sorry for." Zara looked at her hands like they didn't belong to her. That night she sat near the heater. Darren had gone to sleep on the floor again, using only a coat as a pillow. She stared at him for a long time. "Why do you sleep down there?" she asked. He opened one eye. "Because I don't want you to feel trapped." She hesitated, then said, "In the mines, they made us sleep in pits, cold, wet holes. They took our names. They broke our voices. Sometimes I forget I'm even real." "You are," Darren whispered, "and no one owns you anymore." Zara stared at the stars, through the cracked window. For the first time, she whispered to herself, "I don't want to go back." Zara was no longer hiding in the corner. She still didn't smile. She still flinched when loud sounds echoed outside the window. But something had changed. She now sat at the table when Darren brought food. She drank her tea without fear. And, sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, she looked at him, Not with terror, but with curiosity. Darren noticed but said nothing. He kept his distance, gave her space, and treated her like a person, not a project. He didn't try to fix her. He just stayed. One morning, Zira woke up and found breakfast already on the table. Warm bread, fruit paste, and a small blue flower sitting beside the plate. She stared at it for a long time. Darren was sitting by the open window, cleaning parts of an old power core. She picked up the flower and asked softly, "Why did you put this here?" He looked at her and shrugged. "It's the first flower that's bloomed since the sand wind stopped. Thought you might like it." Zara held it gently. No one had ever given her anything beautiful before, not even a single flower. A strange warmth moved through her chest. Later that day, Darren fixed a broken music device. Soft tones filled the small room, gentle hums, soft beats from earth. Zara stood still, staring at the speaker like it was magic. "You've never heard music before?" Darren asked. She shook her head. In the mines, there was only screaming, chains, orders. He nodded and said nothing more. She listened for hours. That night, she hummed a part of the melody in her sleep. The next morning, a strange thing happened. Zara spoke first. "I dreamed I was running," she said quietly while Darren sipped tea. "But not because someone was chasing me, I just wanted to run. Free." Darren smiled. "Sounds like a good dream." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what to do with freedom." "You don't have to know right now," Darren said. "You just live, one day at a time." Zara looked at him. "You don't treat me like I'm broken." "You're not. I was sold for 1 credit." "You were stolen for 1 credit," he corrected gently. "There's a big difference." That night, Zara sat by the small mirror on the wall. She touched her face, slowly brushing her tangled hair. Darren noticed but didn't interrupt. Later she asked, "Why haven't you left?" He blinked. "Left? You fixed the ship engine. You said you had work to do on other planets, but you're still here. With me." Darren leaned back and looked out the window. "I guess. I couldn't leave someone who never had the chance to be human." "I'm not human," she whispered. He looked at her again. "You feel pain. You show kindness. You're more human than most." Zara didn't know what to say. One evening, as the stars lit the sky above the metal rooftops, Zara stood outside for the first time. Her feet touched the street. No chains, no guard tower watching. Darren walked beside her, letting her set the pace. The market stalls were closing. A few merchants glanced their way, some with disgust, some with confusion, but no one dared speak. Darren's presence was quiet, but strong. Zara whispered, "They still see me as a slave." Darren looked at her and replied, "I don't." She looked at him, really looked, and for a second she believed him. When they returned, Zara sat on the bed and asked, "If I ran away tomorrow, would you chase me?" "No," Darren said. "But I'd wait for you to come back." "Why?" "Because you're not a prisoner. You're someone learning to be free." Zara turned her face to the wall. Her voice trembled as she said, "Everyone else gave up on me." Darren said nothing. Instead, he placed her flower in fresh water and whispered, "I'm still here." The nights were the hardest. Zara sat by the window again. Outside, the desert winds had calmed, but inside her mind, storms still raged. She hugged her knees to her chest, resting her chin quietly. The stars looked peaceful. The sky looked endless. But peace didn't come easily to someone who had only known cages. Darren was asleep on the floor, like always. He had offered her the bed from the very first day and she had taken it. But each night her dreams dragged her back into the mines, back into the darkness, back under the whip. That night her screams shattered the silence. "No, please, please not again. I didn't disobey. I didn't," she thrashed, eyes wide open. but seeing something else, something far away and cruel. Darren woke and rushed to her side. He didn't touch her. He remembered how touch could still frighten her. "Zara," he said softly. "You're safe. It's not real. You're here. With me." She was shaking violently, trapped in fear. Her eyes met his, but it was like she couldn't believe him. "I was back there," she whispered. "I felt the whip. I heard the chains. I smelled the dirt again." Darren sat on the floor beside the bed and said nothing. He just stayed with her, silent and still. She reached out, slowly, unsure, and clutched his sleeve with trembling fingers. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I won't," he said. The next morning, Zara's eyes were heavy, but she didn't hide. She helped set the table. She even folded the blanket he had used the night before. It wasn't much, but it was the first time she did something for someone else without fear. "Nightmares again?" Darren asked gently. She nodded. "Do they ever stop?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But they get smaller, a little less loud, one day at a time." Zara touched her own arm where an old scar remained. It looked like a burn. She spoke without looking up. "They marked us like animals. One burn meant slow, 2 meant disobedient, 3 meant punishment without trial." Darren listened without interrupting. "I had 4. He looked at her but said only this. "That means you survived 4 times what most others couldn't." She blinked. "You don't look at me like I'm broken." "Because you're not. You're alive. That takes more strength than any blade or blaster." That evening, she stepped into the shower without flinching. She used the brush he gave her, scrubbed her skin hard as if trying to wash away years of pain. She stared at her reflection afterward, wet hair clinging to her face. Pale eyes, but not empty anymore, not like before. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, Darren didn't look at her body, only her eyes. "You look more yourself," he said. "I don't even know who that is," she admitted. "You will," he said, and meant it. That night she asked him a question for the first time. "Do you ever dream, Darren?" He nodded. "Sometimes. I fought in a war on Earth, I still dream of it." "Do your hands ever shake when you hold a cup?" "Yes." "Do you ever feel like crying when no one's around?" "Sometimes I cry even when someone is," he said and smiled gently. Zara looked at him in silence for a long moment. "You're the only person who's ever spoken to me like that." "I'm just being human," he replied. "You make me want to try being alive again." The room was quiet after that. But inside Zara's heart something louder was growing, not fear, not pain. Hope, just a little, just enough. Zara hummed softly as she folded the blanket by the window. The morning sun painted warm stripes on the floor. For a moment, everything felt safe. But in the dusty distance, a loud horn sounded, deep and angry. She froze. Darren's head snapped, up from the table where he was sharpening a small blade. "What is that?" he whispered. Zara didn't answer. She hurried to the door and peered out. Down the street marched 4 uniformed enforcers carrying long metal poles and cuffs. Their boots hit the ground in hard beats. Behind them, 2 miners stared down at scraps of chain. They held them like trophies. Zara's breath caught. She stepped back. The memory of cold tunnels, endless rock walls, and barking orders flooded her mind. She felt the old panic rising. Darren stood and moved beside her. He laid a hand on her shoulder gently. "They're here for you," he said quietly. Zara shook her head, eyes wide. "No, I belong to no one." A heavy knock came at the door. "Zara Voss," a rough voice called. "By order of the Mine Council, you are their property. Open up." Zara's heart pounded so loud she could hear it. She glanced at Darren. He nodded once, eyes calm but fierce. Zara took a deep breath and opened the door. The enforcers pushed in. Metal cuffs clanked as they reached for her. Zara recoiled, but Darren stepped forward, standing in front of her. "Back away," he said, voice steady. The leader sneered. "This is a human's meddling. Stand aside, Earthling, or we take her by force." Darren reached for his blade, but he did not raise it. "She is free," he said. "No one owns her." The enforcer laughed. "Free? The council says different. Hand her over or face charges." Zara trembled. She wanted to run, to hide, to melt away, but Darren did not budge. In a sudden flash, the lead enforcer lunged forward, grabbing Zara's arm. The cuffs rattled in his other hand. Instinct took over. Darren moved lightning fast. He swept the enforcer's arm aside, sending cuffs clattering. On the floor. The other guards raised their poles. Darren backed up, holding his blade low. "I won't hurt you unless you hurt her." The guards hesitated. They had never seen a human protect a slave before. Their faces flickered between doubt and duty. Zara watched, stunned. This man, this stranger, stood between her and the fury of the Mine Council. He risked everything for her. One enforcer smirked and swung a heavy pole at Darren's legs. Darren twisted, letting the blow miss, then swept out, knocking the pole away. Sparks flew where metal bit metal. Zara's fear roared. She clenched her fists. She saw the whip scars on the nearest guard's forearm, the cruelty in his saber eyes. A fierce anger rose in her chest. She took a step forward. "Stop," she shouted, voice strong but shaky. The guards paused. The sound of her own voice surprised her, clear, unbroken. The leader snarled, "This is not your fight, alien." Zara squared her shoulders. "It is my fight now." She reached inside her ragged belt and pulled out a small metal piece she had hidden, the tip of a rock-cutting tool from the mines. She held it like a dagger. The guards exchanged looks. They lowered their poles just a bit. Darren saw her courage. He stepped back slightly so she could stand beside him. "Together," he said. The leader grunted. "You both are defying the council." Zara took a breath. "I am not council property, I am a person." For a tense moment, silence hung in the room. The guards' poles wavered. The enforcer who lunged earlier looked at his own scars and then at Zara's determined eyes. Finally, the leader bowed his head. We must report this." He motioned his team back. They picked up the fallen cuffs and poles, their boots scuffing on the floor. Zara's tool clattered as she dropped. She backed up, heart still racing. Darren placed a steady hand on her back. "You were brave," he said softly. Zara's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of relief. She had faced the very men who had owned her, and together, she and Darren had stood their ground. When the guards left, Zara sank onto the bed. She stared at the door long after their footsteps faded. Darren knelt beside her and gently cleaned a cut on her wrist. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. I never knew I could fight for myself." He wrapped a clean bandage around her wrist. "You can, and you will." Zara looked up at him. The room felt different now, filled with possibility. The chains had returned once more, but she had broken them again. This time, not with a human coin, but with her own voice and courage. The sun had not yet risen, but Darren was already packing. He moved quickly but silently, throwing clothes, dried food, and spare tools into a small bag. He didn't need to explain anything. Zara already knew. After yesterday, the Mine Council wouldn't just send enforcers, they'd send hunters. "You don't have to come," she said from the corner of the room. Darren looked at her, steady and calm. "I'm not leaving you." "You could die," she whispered. He slung the bag over his shoulder. "Then I'll die free, protecting someone who deserves to live free too." Zara didn't argue again. She just nodded and slipped on the rough boots he had given her days ago. They left through the back door just before the first glow of morning touched the sky. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Darren led them through tight alleys between broken buildings and old scrapyards. Zara followed, her senses sharp. For the first time in a long time, Her heart beat not from fear, but from purpose. They reached the edge of the city. Behind them, the warning sirens began to scream. "They found the room," Darren said. "We have 20 minutes, maybe less." He pulled out a small tracker from his pocket. "There's an old research shuttle east of here. It's hidden in the ruins. If we get there, we can fly to the outer colonies." "Then let's run," Zara said, eyes fierce. But the desert was not kind. The winds picked up fast. The sun turned from gold to blazing white. Sharp rocks tore at their shoes. Darren kept her ahead of him, always between her and danger. Suddenly, a blaster bolt sizzled past. They hit the ground. Two dark figures stood on a ridge above them, minehunters in black armor. "They're cutting us off," Zara shouted. Darren pulled her up and ran. "We go through the old glass fields." "That place is dead," she cried. "So were the mines," he shot back. The glass fields were ruins of a once beautiful alien city, now melted by war. Giant shards of black glass rose like twisted trees. The ground was cracked and sharp. Zara stumbled once, her knee bleeding. Darren pulled her back up without a word. Behind them, hunters entered the field, shouting, shooting, their footsteps closing in. Then, one of the shards exploded beside them, a missed shot. Zara fell again, this time flat on the hot ground. "I'm slowing you down," she gasped. Darren knelt. "I didn't come this far to leave you." Then, without asking, he lifted her in his arms and ran. Zara felt the burn of the sun, the sting of her wounds, the heat of his chest. But most of all, she felt safe. No one had ever carried her. Not when she was a child. Not when she collapsed in the mines. No one. Until now. Darren ran until his lungs felt like fire. His legs trembled. But he didn't stop. He followed the signal on his tracker, weaving through melted ruins, past broken statues and crushed bones of a forgotten people. At last, in a hollow beneath a collapsed tower, he found it, a small, half-buried shuttle. Its metal sides were scorched, but the doors still responded to his touch. He laid Zara down gently inside, then rushed to activate the systems. "Come on, old girl," he whispered to the ship. "Just once, don't let me down." The control panel flickered, then blinked to life. Outside, the hunters arrived. One fired at the hull. Sparks flew. Zara sat up, panting. "They're here! Strap in!" Darren shouted. She grabbed the old belts and braced herself. Another shot hit the ship, but this time the engine roared. The shuttle shook, dust pouring from the walls. With a scream of metal and fire, the ship lifted, just as the hunters closed. Zara watched through the glass as the desert shrank below them. The firestorm of the chase fell away. The city disappeared into the dust. They had made it. Inside the quiet hum of the cabin, Darren slumped back, exhausted. His arm was burned. His lip was bleeding. Zara crawled to his side and placed her hand on his cheek. "You should have left me." "I didn't save you," he said. "I just walked beside you while you saved yourself." Zara closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against his. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "You already do," he replied. The stars looked different from space. Zara sat by the small window of the old shuttle, her face calm, her eyes soft. She watched the galaxy stretch far and wide, free space, endless light. No walls, no whips, no voices screaming orders. She had never seen stars this way before, not from a cage, not from the ground, but from a seat beside someone who gave everything, for her freedom. Darren lay in the medbed, his shoulder patched with auto stitches. He was weak, but breathing steady. He had pushed his body past the limit to get them out. The burns on his side were healing slowly. Zara hadn't left his side since the ship launched. Every hour she changed the bandage. Every time he woke, her hand was there, holding his. "You're not going to die," she whispered more to herself than him. "You're a lot louder than before," he muttered with a weak smile. Zara blinked, then smiled back. 2 days passed. They landed on a peaceful green moon called Aaron 4. The human colony there was small, quiet, and full of people who didn't ask questions. Darren had friends there, mechanics, ex-soldiers, kind people who owed him favors. One of them, a doctor named Callan, treated him and gave Zara a soft place to rest. "She's been through hell," Callan whispered. "She's still standing," Darren replied. "That's more than most." Zara started helping around the colony. She fed animals, carried tools, learned how to repair solar panels. She still froze when people walked too close, still dreamed of the mines. But she was healing. One morning, she woke early and stepped outside, into the misty dawn. The grass was soft. The air smelled like life. She picked a small flower from the field and walked back into the house. She placed it beside Darren's bed and sat beside him. "Do you remember?" she said quietly. "The first flower you gave me." Darren opened his eyes slowly. "Yeah, it was wilted. This one isn't." He looked at her. Really looked. "Neither are you." Zara took a deep breath. "I was sold for 1 credit. I was nothing to them." "You were never nothing," he said. "I didn't know what I was worth until you stayed, until you didn't walk away." She touched his hand gently. "Now, I want to stay too. Beside you." Weeks passed. The colony became home. Zara planted flowers in the garden outside the workshop. She told children stories about stars and broken machines that still worked. Her voice grew stronger, her eyes brighter. People didn't whisper slave anymore. They called her Zara the Brave. Zara the Survivor. Zara, the woman who once cost a single credit but carried the heart of 1,000. One quiet evening, she stood beside Darren watching the sunset. "I don't feel broken anymore," she said. He looked at her proud. "You never were. You were just waiting for someone to remind you." She turned to him, eyes shining in the orange light. "I love you, Darren." He smiled, his hand finding hers. "I've loved you since the moment you didn't look up." She laughed, softly, and now I'll never look away. Once sold like junk, now priceless to the one who saw her worth. This wasn't just a story of rescue. It was a story of return, of dignity, of choice, of love. And Zara was no longer afraid. The end.